When one of Hollywood's most beloved actors finally hits his breaking point, it's not just another TV moment, it's a cultural shockwave. What happens when years of pent-up frustration, bottled up through decades in the industry, finally explode in front of millions watching live? Today we're diving into the unforgettable moment when Danny Devito absolutely lost it on The View. A moment that left audiences stunned and the panel speechless. And trust me, you've never seen anything like this before. The tension in the studio that day was so thick, you could practically slice it with a knife. And what Joy Behar said next, it would change the entire tone of the interview. It started out innocently enough. It was supposed to be just another typical guest appearance on The View. A few laughs, some light-hearted conversation, and maybe a bit of promotion for Devito's latest project. The legendary actor, known for his sharp wit, no-nonsense humor, and a heart of gold beneath the sarcasm, was ready for a pleasant chat. Dressed in his usual relaxed attire, coffee mug in hand, he looked every bit the veteran who had seen it all in Hollywood. Joy Behar, ever the outspoken and fearless host, took the lead that morning. She leaned forward with that signature smirk she's known for, ready to stir the pot just a little. "So Danny," she began, "you've been in Hollywood for decades now. You've seen every trend, every type of star come and go. Tell me, what do you think about all these young actors today complaining about everything? Back in your day, people just did their jobs, no drama, no excuses, right?" The audience chuckled lightly, expecting Danny to deliver one of his trademark witty comebacks. But what they got instead was something no one could have predicted. Danny shifted slightly in his chair, his eyebrows arching just a bit as he chose his words carefully. "Well, Joy," he said, voice calm but steady, "I think every generation faces its own challenges. These young actors today, they're dealing with social media, constant public scrutiny, and a level of pressure we never had to think about. Mental health issues weren't even part of the conversation when I started out." Before he could continue, Joy cut in with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Mental health, social media pressure, give me a break. When I was coming up, we didn't have safe spaces or participation trophies. We had real problems, real struggles. These kids today? They're soft." The air in the studio shifted. The other hosts exchanged quick, uneasy glances, sensing that the playful tone had evaporated. Danny's jaw tightened ever so slightly. He wasn't smiling anymore. Still, he tried to keep his composure. "I wouldn't call anxiety and depression being soft, Joy," he said quietly, though there was a firmness in his voice. "I think that's a dangerous way to look at it." Joy leaned forward, clearly not backing down. "Danny, come on," she said, her tone now dripping with condescension. "You're from New Jersey. You know what tough is. These Hollywood brats crying about their feelings while making millions of dollars, it's embarrassing. They should be grateful for what they have instead of complaining all the time." Danny blinked, his expression hardening. "Grateful?" he repeated, his voice carrying a sharp edge now. "Joy, success doesn't immunize you from being human. It doesn't protect you from pain or mental health struggles. Some of the most successful people I know, friends, colleagues, have fought the hardest battles with depression and anxiety." Joy wasn't having it. "That's exactly the problem," she snapped. "Everyone's a victim now. Everyone's got some sob story about how hard life is. What happened to personal responsibility? What happened to just dealing with your problems instead of making them everyone else's burden?" By now the audience was dead silent. Even the camera operators had stopped moving, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Danny's hands were trembling slightly as he gripped his coffee mug. He placed it gently on the table, leaned forward, and spoke in a voice that was low, controlled but burning with restrained fury. "You want to talk about personal responsibility, Joy?" he said slowly. "Let's talk about that. Personal responsibility is about facing the truth, not denying it. It's about understanding that people struggle, and that sometimes they need help. Pretending those problems don't exist doesn't make you strong, it makes you blind." For a moment, no one spoke. Even Joy looked momentarily taken aback. But in true View fashion, she tried to regain control of the conversation. "Oh, come on, Danny," she said, forcing a laugh. "You're making it sound like everyone in Hollywood is on the verge of a breakdown." Danny's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe not everyone," he said, "but a lot more than you think. This industry eats people alive. It chews them up and spits them out. And when someone finally speaks up about how hard it is, people like you call them weak. That's the problem." The room was electric. The hosts looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment breathe. Whoopi Goldberg, sitting just a few seats down, subtly tried to diffuse the tension. Okay, let's all take a breath, she said gently. But the damage was done. Danny continued, his voice steady but emotional. I've been doing this for over 50 years, Joy. I've seen people break under the pressure, good people, talented people. They didn't need criticism. They needed compassion. Maybe if we had that conversation earlier, we'd have fewer tragedies in this business. The crowd broke into a mixture of uneasy applause and murmurs. Joy shifted uncomfortably but kept a defiant expression, unwilling to concede the point. Yet for the first time in a long time, she didn't have a comeback ready. Danny had drawn a line in the sand and he wasn't backing down. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Joy forced a smile. Well, she said, I guess that's one way to look at it. Danny leaned back in his chair, his voice softening but still charged with emotion. It's not just one way, Joy, it's reality. We need to stop pretending toughness means silence. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is admit they're struggling. The audience erupted in applause, this time loud and genuine. Danny took a sip of his coffee, his composure slowly returning. But the look in his eyes told everyone watching that something had shifted. This wasn't just another talk show spat. It was a moment of raw truth, one that millions of viewers would replay, debate, and remember. As the segment ended, the camera cut to commercial, but the tension lingered in the air. Danny Devito had said what countless people in Hollywood had been afraid to say out loud, and in doing so, he reminded everyone, fame doesn't make you invincible. It just makes your struggles harder to hide. The studio had gone quiet. The audience could feel it. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface was now threatening to boil over. Joy Behar had pushed a lot of guests before, but this time she was facing Danny Devito, and Danny wasn't about to let it slide. Stop blaming the industry, Joy said sharply, leaning forward in her chair. Stop blaming society. Stop blaming everyone but themselves. Danny slowly set his coffee mug down, the thud echoing through the set. His expression hardened, eyes narrowing slightly. So when a young actor takes their own life because they can't handle the pressure, he asked evenly, that's just a lack of personal responsibility, huh? Joy didn't even flinch. If someone can't handle the pressure of being rich and famous, she said coldly, maybe they shouldn't have chosen that career path. There are plenty of people who would kill for those opportunities. The words hung in the air like a toxic fog. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath from the crew and audience. Danny's face flushed a deep red. His breathing grew heavier, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The other hosts looked at each other nervously, shifting in their seats, unsure if they should step in or just let the storm play out. That's interesting. Joy, Danny said finally, his voice dangerously calm, the kind of calm that comes right before an explosion. So, you think mental health is just a choice? You think depression is just people being weak? Joy smirked, clearly convinced she was winning this argument. I think people need to toughen up, she said smugly. My generation didn't have time for all this emotional hand-holding. We had real problems to deal with. Danny tilted his head, the faintest trace of disbelief in his eyes. Real problems? He repeated slowly. He nodded almost to himself before leaning forward. Tell me, Joy, what real problems did you have to deal with when you were starting out in comedy? What was so much harder about your experience? For just a split second, Joy's confidence faltered. The corners of her mouth twitched as she searched for the right words. Then she straightened, regaining her composure. Well, she said, we didn't have all the resources these kids have today. We didn't have therapy on every corner or support groups for every little thing. We just had to figure it out ourselves. Right, Danny replied, his tone tightening like a vice. You had to figure it out yourselves. And how did that work out for your generation? Joy frowned, caught off guard. Danny continued, his voice growing sharper with each word. How many comedians from your era struggled with addiction? How many of your friends turned to alcohol, drugs, or worse because they were trying to figure it out on their own? How many died too young because they never felt safe enough to say they were struggling? That's completely different, Joy snapped, trying to regain control. Addiction is a disease. Mental health is just attitude. Danny froze. For a long moment, he just stared at her, eyes wide in disbelief. Did you just say, he asked slowly, that mental health is just attitude? Did those words actually come out of your mouth on national television? The silence that followed was suffocating. The audience wasn't breathing. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression on Danny's face. The twitch of his jaw, the fire in his eyes, the controlled rage building behind every breath. But Joy didn't stop. She doubled down, as if determined to prove her point no matter the cost. "Yes," she said firmly. "I did say that because it's true. Mental health is largely about your mindset, your attitude toward life. If you choose to be positive, if you choose to be grateful for what you have, you'll be happier. It's that simple." Danny stood up abruptly, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor echoing through the studio. The sudden movement made everyone on set flinch. Even Joy blinked, startled by the intensity in his voice. "It's that simple?" Danny repeated, his voice rising now, every word shaking with anger. "You think it's that simple, Joy? You think people who are battling depression can just flip a switch and choose to be happy? You think people who've lost everything, who feel trapped inside their own minds, just need to try harder?" Joy crossed her arms, her face tightening defensively. "You're twisting my words, Danny." "No," he shot back immediately. "I'm repeating them. Exactly as you said them. You just told millions of people watching this show that their pain isn't real, that it's a choice. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" The crowd erupted in murmurs. One of the co-hosts shifted nervously, clearly wanting to intervene, but no one dared to cut him off. Danny's presence filled the entire set. His voice, though trembling with emotion, carried the weight of decades of experience, loss, and empathy. "Let me tell you something, Joy," he said, his tone softening but only slightly. "I've seen people, friends, colleagues, lose themselves because they didn't feel like they were allowed to talk about what they were going through. Because they thought admitting pain made them weak. You know what killed them? Not their careers, not fame. Silence. The audience was completely still. Even Joy for once didn't have a quick retort. She looked uncomfortable but stayed quiet, perhaps realizing she had finally pushed too far. Danny took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "You talk about your generation being tough," he continued. "But toughness isn't pretending you're okay when you're not. It's having the courage to be honest, to ask for help, to tell someone you're hurting and not be ashamed of it." Joy looked away. The cameras caught the flicker of emotion crossing her face, a mix of pride, discomfort, and perhaps a glimmer of realization. Danny stepped back from the table, running a hand through his hair, visibly trying to regain composure. "You know what's funny?" he said quietly. "For all our talk about progress, it's still people like you who keep us from moving forward. People who confuse compassion with weakness." A few audience members clapped softly. The sound grew, hesitant at first, then stronger. The entire room began to applaud, not for the argument but for the truth that had just been spoken aloud. Joy forced a tight smile, clearly ready to change the subject. "Well, Danny," she said awkwardly, "I think we'll have to agree to disagree." Danny looked at her for a long moment before replying. "No, Joy," he said simply. "We don't have to agree, but maybe you should start listening." And with that, he sat back down, crossing his arms as the applause echoed through the studio. The producers scrambled to cut to a commercial, but everyone watching, both in the studio and at home, knew they had just witnessed something real. Something raw, something that would be replayed and discussed for weeks. Because that day, Danny Devito didn't just lose his temper. He reminded the world that empathy isn't weakness and that sometimes the bravest thing anyone can do is to speak up when silence becomes unbearable. The air inside the studio felt electric, humming with the kind of tension that no director could have planned. The conversation had already spiraled far beyond what anyone expected, but now Danny DeVito's patience had run out completely. His voice cut through the thick silence like a blade. "Joy, do you have any idea how ignorant you sound right now?" Joy's eyebrows shot up, her voice climbing an octave. "Ignorant?" she repeated, half laughing in disbelief. "I'm ignorant because I believe in personal responsibility and positive thinking." Danny leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "No, Joy. You're ignorant because you're dismissing the legitimate struggles of an entire generation. You're ignorant for thinking mental health issues are just a matter of attitude. And you're ignorant for sitting on this platform in front of millions of people and spreading dangerous misinformation about something you clearly know nothing about." From behind the cameras, producers were waving their hands, signaling to wrap it up, to move on, to do something. But it was too late. Danny was past the point of no return. He had been holding back for several minutes, trying to keep the conversation civil. But Joy's words, her tone, her refusal to acknowledge the weight of what she was saying, had lit the final fuse. "You know what, Joy?" Danny said, his voice rising, filling every corner of the studio. "I've been in this business for over 50 years. I've worked with hundreds of actors, young and old. I've seen some of the brightest talents alive destroy themselves because they believed exactly what you're saying right now. That their pain wasn't real. That they just needed to toughen up." Joy blinked, caught between irritation and nervousness. "Danny, I think you're overreacting." Danny laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound that didn't carry a trace of humor. "Overreacting?" he repeated, shaking his head. "You think I'm overreacting? You just told millions of viewers that mental health is an attitude problem. You just dismissed the struggles of every person watching this show who battles depression, anxiety, trauma, and I'm overreacting?" The other hosts sat frozen. No one dared to interrupt. Even Whoopi Goldberg, usually the peacekeeper, stayed quiet, her eyes flicking between the two like she was watching a train about to crash. The studio audience didn't make a sound. Every eye was on Danny, the man best known for his humor, his warmth, his irreverent jokes, now shaking with raw emotion. "Look, Danny," Joy said finally, trying to steady her voice. "I'm not saying mental health isn't real. I'm just saying that people today are too quick to use it as an excuse." Danny's head snapped up. "An excuse?" he repeated slowly, his voice trembling with anger. "An excuse for what, Joy? For being human? For struggling? For hurting in ways you can't see?" Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Danny didn't let her. The dam had broken. "Do you think Robin Williams used depression as an excuse?" he demanded. "Do you think Philip Seymour Hoffman used addiction as an excuse? These were brilliant, talented, loving people who gave the world everything they had. And it still wasn't enough to silence the pain inside them." "You call that an excuse?" The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the buzz of the studio lights, the faint rustle of cue cards in a producer's trembling hands. Joy's expression shifted, less confident now, more defensive. "I'm not saying that," she muttered. "I'm saying—" Danny cut her off, his voice breaking slightly as the emotion spilled out. "No, Joy, you are saying that. And that's the problem. That attitude is why so many people stay silent, because they're afraid of being judged by people who think like you, people who think strength means pretending everything's fine." His words hit hard. A few people in the audience nodded, others wiped at their eyes. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was truth bleeding out in real time. Danny took a breath, trying to calm himself, but his voice still shook. "You know what personal responsibility really looks like, Joy? It's not ignoring pain. It's facing it head on. It's saying, I'm not okay right now and I need help. That's courage. That's responsibility." Joy crossed her arms tightly, clearly uncomfortable. "You're twisting what I said," she protested. "I just mean people shouldn't use it as a crutch." "A crutch?" Danny's eyes widened again. "You think seeking help is a crutch? That talking to a therapist, taking medication, or admitting you're struggling makes you weak? That's not weakness, Joy. That's survival." The producers were now practically pleading off camera, cutting to the floor manager for guidance. But nobody could cut this moment short. Danny wasn't finished. He pointed toward the audience. "There are people sitting right here, right now, who fought their own battles with mental health. Maybe they've lost someone. Maybe they've struggled in silence because of the exact stigma you're promoting. Imagine one of them hearing you say it's just an attitude problem." Joy glanced toward the crowd, suddenly aware of the emotional weight pressing down on the room. A few audience members avoided her gaze. Danny continued, softer now but still fierce. "You want to talk about excuses? Here's the truth. Society's been making excuses for decades. Excuses for ignoring pain, for labeling it weakness, for refusing to listen. And now finally people are speaking up. And you're telling them to shut up and toughen up. That's not strength. That's cruelty dressed up as wisdom." Joy's lips parted, but no sound came out. Danny took another deep breath, his shoulders heaving. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I loved Robin," he said, his tone heavy with emotion. "He made the world laugh while he was breaking inside. He never used depression as an excuse. He fought every day to stay here. And you're telling me he just needed a better attitude?" Joy looked away, visibly shaken for the first time. Her hands fidgeted with her note cards. The audience remained still, the energy in the room raw and unfiltered. Danny leaned back slightly, eyes glistening. "You know what I think, Joy? I think your generation didn't talk about these things because you were scared. Scared of what people would think, scared of looking weak. And now, instead of learning, you're passing that fear on to the next generation. There was no applause this time, just silence. The kind of silence that comes when truth hits too close to home. Danny exhaled deeply, his anger slowly giving way to sadness. "I don't want to fight with you," he said softly, "but I can't sit here and let you tell people that their pain isn't real. Because it is real. And if this conversation stops even one person from feeling ashamed of asking for help, then I'll take every bit of heat that comes from speaking up." Joy didn't respond. Her face was pale, her trademark smirk gone. A moment later, the director's voice cracked through the speakers. "We're going to commercial," he said, his tone shaky. The lights dimmed slightly, but nobody moved. Danny Devito sat there, breathing heavily, staring at the desk in front of him. The cameras faded to black. But for everyone who had witnessed it, on set or at home, it was clear something powerful had just happened. Because in that brief, unforgettable moment, Danny didn't just stand up to Joy Behar. He stood up for everyone who had ever been told their pain wasn't real. And that's a message the world would be talking about long after the commercial break ended.